everybody. Robert Wallace, NewPrecept Media, going live. I'm going to address a question that I got about the law of attraction. I'm going to give you a little tidbit of information because I think it's really going to help you. As a matter of fact, I know it will, as long as you apply it and you listen to the words. Also, let me say that while you're trying to get the law of attraction to work for you, it's really important that you continue to study, that you fill your head. You've basically got to reframe or relearn everything. Everything that you've ever learned comes through this materialistic mindset of this cause and effect mentality. But the thing is, what we're taught is the cause of things is actually the effect of something else. So we're never really handling the causes, the true causes of things, in order to create changes at the root. Instead, what's happening is we're looking at circumstances, and we're saying that because of the circumstance X, this is the effect that is going to have. The problem with that is we're allowing ourselves to build a leaning tower of Pisa on a spinning disc. You know, it's not going to work out because we need to establish a couple key or a whole lifetime of key facts in order to sustain this new masterpiece you're going to build from scratch on the rubble of your old life. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to say is that you're continuing your education in terms of your metaphysical education, how things really come about, what things consist of in the spiritual realm, the universal laws in which other things work. The law of attraction is one universal law. Its concept is basically that of prayer. Ask, believe, and receive. Ask and believe with no doubting, and you will receive. The problem is that, like with the question Katie's asked, since LOA is always happening, when we find ourselves not manifesting what we say we want, write it down and surrender, etc., where do we look first? And what's the first thing to do? Well, the reality is your brain that you spent 30, 40, 50 years creating is full of that much material that you may have to go back now, refute, and recalibrate. Because in these years, you've also set up counter-intentions, beliefs that say that certain things can't happen without certain other things happening first, or there are certain levels of deservingness that have to be reached or attained before certain things can happen to me, or that there's handleable scenarios. You know, he's lucky, I'm not, I can't do anything about that. So these are not true statements. You can postulate them and you make them true, but in and of themselves, they're basically subjective observations. And unless we're going to subjectively observe ourselves into a place that we truly don't belong, there's really no need to use that sort of logic, because it fails ultimately. Because just like your subjective beliefs and what you see now differs based on circumstances and your mood and all of these sorts of things, in the future, everything can be undermined by a change in those things. So you want to find and establish the entire premise of your desire or your postulate on something objective, something that's not changing, such as the eternal true definition of what is a soul, who is God, what's the purpose of life. These key questions, they're foundational. And as long as they're established in your mind and you build upon that rock, the whole analogy, if you found your house on the sand, then it falls away if you found it here or there. But if you establish it on a rock, something consistent, then you will have what it takes to weather the conditions of doubt, of worry, of trial, and horrible things that can happen and inevitably happen to us in life. And stay on that footing and to continue to be strong and to build bigger and better things from that place. So you want to make sure you have your foundation down right. You're going to do that through a study in the spiritual, esoteric, metaphysical. I prefer Christian mysticism, Christian the mysteries as they're taught in all religions, because what they're ultimately going for is not just to help you to manifest things and items and circumstances and all of this great stuff that motivates us, especially initially. When we get into this whole field, we're looking for what's going to draw me in the things that I want, the money that I want, because we're still under the belief or the false assumption that those things will make us happy, because then our circumstances will be happy, and I'm not happy because my circumstances aren't where they need to be. And we know that's not true, because we can find another man in your same circumstance who's, cheesing everywhere, smiling, happy, content, and we realize that it's a person-to-person scenario. You can choose to be happy in any situation. And just like you can be happy in any situation, you can be miserable in any situation. So having what you want isn't necessarily the cure either. So it becomes very important to understand who you are and why you're going for these things, and to find happiness in that understanding, and that will sustain you through the bleak, hopeless days when it doesn't look like the universe hears anything you say, and it keeps you going. So you can actually bring yourself up, rise yourself up, and sustain yourself with just the knowledge. If I was out on a camping trip and I had to stand put at a tree, and my companion say, "We're going to go and we're going to come back for you. Stay here." The knowledge that they're out there and are coming back for me can sustain me, even though I'm not getting phone calls, even though I'm not getting postcards, constant chat updates. And that's kind of how this whole thing is. Initially, you might have to, convince yourself that everything is working out. And then all of a sudden signs start to occur. And this is inevitable. You're going to walk by somebody who's mentioning a part of what you were just saying or thinking or asking for. Somebody is going to put into your hand the very thing you were asking for. And all of these magical things do happen. But again, we have to be content with, am I creating a sound objective foundation based on universal laws? And if so, then you wouldn't be having this problem. You wouldn't have any of these questions. You would be able to answer them yourself. But continued growth is kind of the point. So sorry for going off on that tangent, especially if it confused you more. The real objective here should be, as the scriptures say, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. So there's no reason why you can't have the things that you want. The question is, do you really want what you think you want? And you'll only know that if you're wanting for the right reasons. You're not thinking in terms of what's right and wrong, or the right reasons and the wrong reasons, if you're concerned with what people think about you, or if you're concerned with what other people have, or if you're concerned with how such things reflect on you and things of that nature. Because now you're taking a materialistic approach, even if you don't realize it, and that materialistic approach goes up against the spiritual world and the spiritual approach, which runs by spiritual laws. We can't really apply physical laws to a spiritual world. Things are much more instantaneous in the spiritual world. We can afford to think one thing and say another here in the physical world and produce a result, but you can't do that in the spirit world. So we have to purify ourselves, and we have to handle ourselves in the spiritual world, or in our personal, inner, mental, emotional life, the way that we would want to be perceived. So that means there's not really time and a buffer for to say or to he and haw over things spiritually like there is here in the physical world. And the result of that is, because a lot of people, most people, don't pay any attention to the thoughts that they're thinking, or the feelings that they're feeling, or their relationship to each other, or their relationship to what is manifesting in their lives. They're not seeing the reasons for the coincidences or synchronicities. And so as a result, a person who's not paying attention in that realm, they're going to have problems manifesting things, and they're going to have problems keeping optimistic momentum going, because they're going to be looking around and they're going to see, well, this isn't in place, this hasn't manifested yet, that's still looking slow. these sorts of thoughts. And those sorts of thoughts, which are observations, subjective observations of the physical world, this is not encouraging us to continue forward. So in the spiritual mindset and taking the spiritual approach, especially when we're postulating or desiring to put out something, is really a matter of learning how to attain stillness. This is the goal of all the religions. This is the way that you're going to attain the powers of clairvoyance and eventually enter into spiritual worlds, which leads us into the kingdom of heaven. And this is done through, as we all know, somehow we all know it, but none of us can really do it, the keeping still of the mind and the feelings. Now, the keeping still of the mind and the feelings, or the silence, attaining this, is probably the biggest issue that people have. It's the main goal everybody strives after, and the main thing people can't seem to do. What we usually hear is that I've been trying to keep and do these meditations for years, but there's always that guy chattering in my head. There's these ideas, and there's all these thoughts, and they domino into all these other things. And the emotional feelings, we're stirred this way and that when we're trying to be quiet and still. And the more you say, don't think a thought, what happens? You're going to have thoughts about that thought, and all sorts of crazy stuff happens. Things in the spiritual world are happening to you because of the lens that you're looking through. The key here is that there is a spiritual world of knowledge and wisdom that's flowing from the spiritual world by default into every one of us, and it's trying to flow out of us. The problem is we're capping it with the personal thoughts and the feelings we're holding, so we need to learn to silence that. Now, from that state of peace, things can manifest much easier, because now we have actual spiritual energy coming in and supporting us. The difference between a thing manifesting and not manifesting sometimes is the difference between holding your head different in one way versus another, or standing here versus there, where you run into the right person, or they see you doing something that sets off a trigger that tells them to do this. And so it's these subtle things that we're not really even calculating that are actually deciding, maybe for those in our environment, what they're going to do to us and how they're going to treat us. And so because we can't necessarily hold ourselves up and look in a mirror at every angle to see how we look to every person and make sure everything's perfect for everybody who looks, it's really impossible to please all people. We can keep from offending people the best we can and so on. But the key is going to be having our mind in the right mindset, and then these actions are actually quite natural. And then what needs to happen will happen. And that will be triggered based on what we're doing, which is based off of where our mind's actually at. So you can't really, you can't fake being truly ready for a thing. If you're in vibration for it, all of the effects will come off, which will create all of the effects that need to happen in order to produce the result or the manifestation in your life. So you really should have just one main focus, and that needs to be on your spiritual self and on your spiritual desires and goals. If we take a materialistic approach, we can still use the law of attraction and manifest what we want. As a matter of fact, the law of attraction is working for the atheist just as much as for the believer. It's working for the rich atheist just like it's working for the poor believer. So, what's the difference here? Well, there is a continuity of thought and expectation in the mind of him who has. Scriptures tell us, to him who has, more will be given. To him who has not, even that which he has will be taken away. So if we think in terms of mental disposition, if I think I have success, if I think I have peace in some area, then more will be given, and I'll actually see the manifestation of that. I could be in a peaceful environment and say I want peace, but be feeling fear and worry and awkwardness. And because those are there, I can actually manifest discordance and catastrophe, even in that peaceful environment. We could be a good person, like in the other example where we have maybe a believer who's poor and an atheist who is well-to-do. And our deeds will inform our conscience, and that will inform the way that we approach our desires in the spiritual world and how we're going to get things. But there is, short-handed ways of having a dirty conscience, keeping our sights on getting things quick and dirty and somehow attaining the appearance of success. But one is sustainable, one's not. One is going to give eternal fruits and the other one isn't. Even if you die the richest man in the graveyard, you still haven't really thought out this life long enough if you're content with being the richest man in the graveyard. And so if we set our goals, though, and our sights beyond what the average person is, and more toward where the religious devotees of times past had traditionally set it, and where, modern spiritual people and people really practicing spirituality are putting their attention, they're looking for not so much the outer environment, but they're looking for spiritual peace, but ultimately eternal life, and having a consciousness of a spiritual dimension that they can access now instead of having to wait to die to be rewarded with a world of material items, which they think, again, will make them happy. And maybe, God will zap in joy and bliss into their head and everything will magically happen. Because even though we have our past karma and sins, which are atoned for by our belief in the redemption process of our deity, Christ, we still need to make the efforts. Because remember, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that too shall he reap. So even if a Christian or a believer or somebody who's been atoned their past sins, they're still going to need to go through and re-educate themselves, set things right inside of themselves, and strive for perfection. And it's in setting things in harmony and making things perfect that they're actually readying themselves to experience something they wouldn't otherwise be able to stand. And that is living in a spiritual dimension, which is full of life and beings and spirits that we can't even conceive of on this end unless we go to a movie and see it in some mystical scene. And even then, it's a fantasy. The average person nowadays would faint if they became privy to these things. They'd become horrified. They become scared of the dark if they see the things that are actually existing right here mid-air between us. So it's important that we're really, again, looking at the universal laws, understanding how things work, looking at the theological history of where man comes from, where he's going, what he's made out of, and the goals. And then we're taking an approach to unite the true nature of who we are with where we're going. That is, setting a goal like the kingdom of heaven, the attainment, seek ye first. Make that your main goal. And then you'll have lesser goals along the way. You'll have things that you say you like, or things that you'll stare at mindlessly, and before you know it, they'll be manifesting. And it's like, where is this power of favor coming from? Well, certain other forces are oriented correctly. And when you have everything focused in the same trajectory, then it exponentially helps the flow. It helps bring things in. It clears your conscience, it clears your worries, it clears your fears, and it puts you in a position where now you don't have to try so hard for what you want. The hard work that must be done in the spiritual life is done all internally. And that is done through the changing of the mind. Learning to think differently. Learning to accept things about yourself that are not otherwise perceptible, or the rest of the world doesn't own it about themselves. It's easy to live in denial because we can't see it, or because somebody hasn't called it out, or because other people can't see it. But taking accountability for every off thought and recognizing where that thought comes from, and choosing what you're going to allow into your heart and into your mind is your chore. And if you work on that, eventually you start to attain, and it could just take a week, it could take several years, and in most cases, now I've been studying this pretty intensely for 10 years, and it's that was absolutely necessary time, and I will need the rest of my life, just as we all will, because even the most well-developed person, even the saints, they know that they'll never truly have that perfect understanding, a perfect knowledge of the things of God. And so we are, in a sense, always striving for perfection. But there are standards that we can hold up and not budge from, that we can expect out of ourselves, that will create exponential growth. If you set a bar here, even if you fall short, you're only going to be right here. If you set it way up here, you might end up lower than that, but you're still going to be way up here. So set a really high standard for yourself. And in terms of law of attraction, make sure that it's a spiritual, it's goal, something that's really anchored to who you are as a being. Not to the body, which is fading, it's going to get old, you want that pretty dress. Well, I mean, you're going to become an old, wrinkled person one day and not going to look as good in that dress, Is that really worth all of your time and obsession, But if we're looking at things that are really going to serve us way down the line, then we put a lot less attention and effort into attracting things that make us feel good in the now, if that makes any sense. So, in summary, Katie, with your question, it's a great question. We need to keep postulating. We need to keep reminding ourselves. We need to keep affirming what we want. Vision boards are huge. It's kind of a pain to go get a board and get magazines and but if you do it once, you'll have a lot of fruits from it, because without a vision, the people perish. So you want to keep a consistent ideal in front of you. But more than that, even if you attract everything you want on earth, you're going to be sorely disappointed if you get to the end of your life and attract everything on every vision board you want, if heaven and interdimensional conscious awareness is not on that. Because you can attract interdimensional conscious awareness and abilities of clairvoyance. And as long as you're pursuing that information and the next steps that you need to attract to bring you up, because now you're trying to attract intangibles, you're trying to attract information and revelations to get you to this place where you're having these cognitions, can happen. The kinds of books, the kinds of information you need to get there, they'll show up. And you'll have experiential, me personally, having made that my core pursuit some time back and realizing that, I say I'm trying to pursue the spirit, but I'm really trying to pursue the spirit through this law of attraction only. And the problem with that is the law of attraction is prayer, which we're all using and which we can all use. But if we never get around to praying for the right thing, how sad would that be? How sad would it be to have the power to attract any car that you want, but you yourself are not a free being, in that you're still bogged down by the thoughts and the feelings of your corrupted, defiled, earth-bound brain and body. Okay? But if you... And for a lot of people, it's a huge step to think about interdimensional conscious awareness. A lot of people don't believe in the concept of the mystical, of the spiritual worlds, of other higher dimensions, of mystical experience. A lot of people don't believe that this stuff even exists, let alone can see themselves setting that as their end-all, be-all goal. And to them, I would simply say, when did you decide that your goal was big enough? When did you decide that your goal really represents the maximum of what, A, you're capable of producing, and B, the universe is capable of presenting or manifesting for you? Because if you really keep thinking about it, if you've ever been honored or privileged to have a spiritual experience, something you can look back on, maybe you had a vision of a loved one visiting you after they died, maybe you saw a spirit, or you saw some unexplained phenomena of some kind that let you know that there's more out there, then really you got enough information to postulate a much bigger goal. And to hope for things beyond anything which anybody around you could imagine. And the silly is, hopefully that's not silly for you to imagine. And hopefully you're my demographic, because I see a lot of spiritual people who want these sorts of things, but they don't know how they should come about, or what's the first step. And I'm going to give you right now just a couple pointers, because this could be groundbreaking if you are legitimately looking to access these other dimensions without the use of supplemental extracurricular substances, for instance. I would recommend you would look into Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner is a mystic who lived from the late 1800s to about 1925. He wrote about 30 books, and there's another 350 books or so of just his collected works from his lectures. And in basically every single one of these books or collected volumes, there's the same infrastructure, the same framework is gone over. And this is great when you learn that the framework that he's teaching you is the framework that will get anything done. And that is how a person becomes conscious of their spiritual selves. So he gives specific meditations that if you can accomplish, which you can, if you can sit down and get the end result of any one of these meditations, you will develop a extrasensory perception that will enable you to see clairvoyantly into areas and parts of life that most people around you do not believe exists, would not believe exists, cannot believe exists. And so you're automatically on your way to become a seer, to becoming a saint, a mystic, or whatever, because the gifts of the Spirit, I mean, that is a fine line marking, most pastors at most churches from the real spiritual accomplishments of real spiritual, living teachers, masters. And it's that they have spiritual gifts, the ability to actually do, Jesus said of his miracles, these things and greater you shall do. So I'm thinking to myself, well, how come my pastor's wearing glasses? Or how come he's having these problems? Or where's the fruits of a well-developed spiritual life? And the thing is, unfortunately, the masses have not been educated. Our scriptures have been watered down. The real methods have been left out. And there is just so much confusion and so many options from people who don't really know what they're talking about, that's causing everybody to go this way and that with their pursuit. And all the while, they're overlooking the thing that's under their very nose because they're not being taught to see in this in-between space where all of this other stuff exists. Rudolf Steiner will help you get to the bottom of that and really help you supercharge your pursuit of the kingdom of heaven as an interdimensional reality. And the law of attraction, I'll tell you, really took a big back seat once I began this pursuit, because how can you compare anything you can hold in your hand to something you can see with your spirit's eyes? I mean, once the body's gone, you don't no longer have a physical hand to hold that physical object with. You don't live in the same plane of existence. You no longer see these items as you currently see them. But the spiritual progress that you make in the astral realm, in your ethereal body, in your spiritual pursuit, definitely carries over. It's the whole point of this incarnation, the whole point of this life, is to develop the spiritual faculties, because it's only in this life that you're going to be able to develop yourself in a way that you're going to progress in the spiritual world. Most of us are going to die without having pursued the spiritual realities, without having pursued the hunt into our soul and into our spirit. And we're going to find ourselves basically where we left off from, our last incarnation, if you will, which is being really, in a sense, no closer to our goal. Now, of course, life is laid out in a way that even if you go through it blindly without setting the lofty goal of the kingdom of heaven as your objective, you're still being made to run through processes and trials which are making you ready and strengthening you for that day and time in that life when you will desire the kingdom of heaven and you will be ready to pursue it and to live it. So there's still something to be said for a life that isn't directed towards the kingdom of heaven, but at the same time, if you're looking to make exponential progress, if you're looking to maybe get toward the end of this incarnation cycle or whatever, you need to set out that goal so that you can have a chance of, accomplishing it. Your ability to navigate in the spiritual world is dependent on what, when you die, is really limited by what you do with this life. So if you don't spend any time trying to develop those spiritual abilities, then you're going to find yourself more or less powerless, more or less undeveloped, as you would be, as opposed to as you would be if you just made minor efforts here. Even minor efforts reap great rewards in the spiritual world. But really, anyway, I've digressed a lot. We were talking about the law of attraction. We talked about setting higher, loftier spiritual goals like attaining interdimensional conscious awareness. We talked about Rudolf Steiner and his meditations. And in another video, I will talk about the specifics of these meditations that can be done. But of course, like I was saying, we need to continue to keep educating ourselves. Even if you're, like Steiner says, for every step that you make in esoteric training, you need to take another 3 steps in your personal development. So in order to keep up, in order to not be kind of have this glass ceiling and how far ahead you can move. So it becomes just as important to fill your head with the esoteric knowledge of the spiritual world, of the spiritual beings, of all the things you can't see by sitting at the feet of a master, somebody like Rudolf Steiner or somebody who's been into the spiritual world. Emanuel Swedenborg is a good one. I've got a couple shelves just dedicated to the kingdom of heaven as a spiritual pursuit, of books written by people who have seen in that dimension. And then, by learning that information and then plugging in these meditations, which between you and me, you could do light esoteric training, in these meditations. And we could take somebody off the street. And if they dedicated themselves, probably, maybe within 10 minutes, we could have them seeing the spiritual world. I broke through one of the meditations that I wasn't able to get through for some time. And I said, you know what, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to do this meditation on this plant, the steroid plant. And I'm going to attain this thoughtlessness, and I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to get deep and get these results. And I'm not going to get up from my desk. I'm not going to go home. I'm not going to have dinner. I'm not making any future plans until I accomplish the end objective of this module. And within 5 minutes, I had it. So I really feel like if a person, and of course there's things maybe I don't know as far as my readiness, but the decisions, the way to hold yourself, if it works for one person, it works for another. It's just, are you able to manage that state of mind? So I'm going to close off this video because we've gone far left field, but stay tuned. Ask your questions about the law of attraction, about interdimensional conscious awareness, about meditation, spiritual pursuit, what's out there, the unseen laws of the universe. Ask those questions because I'm going to get to them. All right. Thank you for your time. Robert Wallace, NewPrecept.
Christian consciousness, metaphysics, mind, body, spirit. Getting to the bottom of our meta history. The NewPrecept video blog.